Sometimes a stranger's silence speaks louder than a lifetime of words, and one gentle touch can change everything. The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like every other morning for the past 3 years. Jake rolled over and hit the snooze button, his eyes burning from staring at computer screens until midnight. His small apartment felt like a prison cell, dark curtains blocking out the world, dirty dishes piled in the sink, and empty coffee cups scattered across his desk. He dragged himself to the shower, letting the hot water run over his tired shoulders. Looking in the mirror, Jake barely recognized himself anymore. When did those dark circles under his eyes become permanent? When did his face start looking so worn out? He was only 31, but he felt like he was carrying the weight of the entire world. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Jake grabbed his wrinkled shirt from the floor. Another 16-hour day waited for him at the office. His phone was already buzzing with messages from his boss asking about reports that were due yesterday. Jake's stomach twisted into a familiar knot. This was supposed to be temporary, just a few years of hard work to build his career. But somehow, temporary had become his entire life. On the kitchen counter sat a photo from last summer, Jake and his girlfriend Lisa at the beach, both of them laughing at something silly. They looked so happy, so carefree. Now he couldn't remember the last time they had laughed together. Every conversation seemed to turn into an argument about time. Time he didn't have, time he couldn't give, time that was slipping away faster than sand through his fingers. Lisa had been patient for 3 years, but her patience was wearing thin like an old sweater. Last week she had looked at him with tired eyes and said they needed to talk seriously about their future. Tonight was supposed to be that conversation. Jake's chest tightened just thinking about it. The subway station was already crowded at 7 a.m. Jake pushed through the turnstile, joining the river of people flowing toward the trains. Everyone looked the same. Tired faces staring at phones, shoulders hunched forward, moving like robots through their morning routine. Was this what life was supposed to be? Jake wondered if anyone else felt as lost as he did. His phone rang. Lisa's name flashed on the screen. Jake stared at it for a moment, then let it go to voicemail. He knew she was calling to confirm their dinner plans, but he couldn't face another conversation about his schedule right now. The guilt sat heavy in his stomach like a stone. The train was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Jake squeezed into a spot near the door, his face pressed close to a stranger's shoulder. The air was thick and stuffy, filled with the smell of coffee and morning stress. Through the window, he watched the city blur past, buildings and people and cars all rushing somewhere important. Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through work emails. 15 new messages since he left his apartment 20 minutes ago. His boss wanted updates on 3 different projects. A client was unhappy with the latest proposal. The presentation for Thursday needed major changes. Each email felt like another brick added to the wall that was slowly crushing him. A text message popped up from Lisa. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I made your favorite dinner. Love you." The message should have made him smile, but instead it made his chest feel even tighter. He knew what tonight's conversation would be about. Lisa wanted them to move in together, maybe start planning a future. But how could he plan a future when he could barely handle today? The train screeched to a halt at 42nd Street. Jake looked up from his phone, realizing he had been so lost in his thoughts that he wasn't paying attention to the stops. This wasn't his station. His stop was still 3 more down the line. But the doors were already closing and the train was moving again. Jake cursed under his breath. Now he would be even more late to the office. His boss was already annoyed about yesterday's missed deadline. Being late would just add fuel to the fire. Jake's hands started to shake slightly, a new habit he had developed over the past few months whenever stress got too high. The train pulled into the next station, and Jake pushed his way toward the door. He needed to get off and catch a train going back in the other direction. As he squeezed through the crowd, his shoulder bag caught on someone's arm, spilling half his papers onto the dirty train floor. Jake scrambled to pick them up, apologizing to annoyed passengers who stepped around him like he was invisible. Finally off the train, Jake stood on the platform trying to reorganize his scattered papers. His hands were still shaking and he could feel sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Around him, hundreds of people rushed past, everyone focused on their own problems, their own destinations, their own busy lives. The platform was dimly lit, with old fluorescent lights that flickered on and off like they couldn't make up their minds. The walls were covered with advertisements for things Jake couldn't afford and didn't want. Everything felt gray and cold and endless. Jake's phone buzzed again. Another email from his boss. This time it was marked urgent in red letters. Jake's stomach dropped as he read the message. The client presentation had been moved up to this afternoon. All the work Jake had planned to do over the next 2 days now had to be finished in the next 4 hours. His phone rang again. Lisa's name appeared on the screen for the second time. Jake knew he should answer. Knew he should explain why he would probably have to cancel dinner again. But the words felt stuck in his throat like glue. How could he tell her that work had taken over his life so completely that he couldn't even keep a simple dinner date? Jake let the call go to voicemail again. The guilt was eating him alive, but he couldn't face disappointing her voice right now. He promised himself he would call her back in a few minutes, after he figured out how to handle the crisis at work. Standing there on the cold platform, surrounded by strangers but feeling completely alone, Jake wondered how his life had become such a mess. When he was younger, he had dreams and plans and hope for the future. Now all he had were deadlines and stress and the constant feeling that he was drowning in responsibilities. The next train was still 5 minutes away according to the digital sign. 5 more minutes of standing in this underground world, breathing stale air and watching people rush past like water flowing downhill. Jake leaned against a pillar and closed his eyes, trying to remember what it felt like to be happy, to be calm, to be anything other than completely overwhelmed. But happiness felt like a foreign language he used to speak fluently but had somehow forgotten. Peace felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. And hope felt like something that belonged to other people. People who had their lives figured out. People who knew where they were going. People who weren't slowly falling apart at the seams. Jake opened his eyes and checked the time again. Still 3 more minutes until the next train. 3 more minutes of this underground purgatory before he could continue his journey to another day of chaos and stress and impossible deadlines. He looked around the platform at all the other waiting passengers, wondering if any of them felt as lost as he did, or if he was the only one slowly drowning, while everyone else somehow managed to keep swimming. The train finally arrived with a loud screech that echoed through the underground station. Jake pushed his way through the opening doors, squeezing between tired commuters who all looked like they would rather be anywhere else. The car was so packed that Jake had to grab onto a metal pole just to keep from falling over when the train lurched forward. As the train moved through the dark tunnels, Jake tried to focus on his breathing. His therapist had taught him this trick months ago. Count to 4 while breathing in, hold for 4, then breathe out for 4. But even this simple exercise felt impossible when his mind was racing with everything that could go wrong today. The presentation that got moved up to this afternoon was for their biggest client. If Jake messed this up, it wouldn't just mean another lecture from his boss. It could mean losing the account entirely, and losing a client that big could mean losing his job. The thought made his palms sweat against the metal pole. Jake pulled out his phone and saw 3 missed calls from Lisa. There was also a text message that made his heart sink even lower. I bought ingredients for your favorite meal today. I know we haven't had much time together lately, but tonight feels important. Please don't cancel on me again. The word again hit him like a punch to the gut. How many dinners had he canceled in the past month? How many weekends had he spent in the office instead of with the person he loved? Jake tried to count, but the number was too depressing to think about. 2 stops later, Jake finally reached his station. He pushed through the crowd again, muttering sorry to people as he bumped into them with his heavy bag. Everyone was in such a hurry, moving like they were being chased by invisible monsters. Maybe they were, Jake thought. Maybe everyone was running from the same feeling of being completely overwhelmed by life. But as Jake stepped onto the platform, something made him stop in his tracks. This wasn't his usual station. In his panic about the missed calls and urgent emails, he had gotten off 1 stop too early. Again. This was becoming a habit, being so lost in his own stress that he couldn't even remember where he was supposed to go. The platform was different from his usual stop. It was older, with cracked tiles on the walls and dim lighting that made everything look yellow and worn out. There were fewer people here, and they moved slower, like they weren't in quite as much of a hurry as everyone else in the city. Jake looked at the train schedule posted on a dirty sign. The next train to his correct station wouldn't come for another 8 minutes. 8 more minutes of being late. 8 more minutes of his boss getting angrier. 8 more minutes of his already impossible day becoming even more impossible. He found a spot near the wall and leaned against it, feeling the cool concrete through his shirt. His phone buzzed with another urgent email, but for once Jake didn't look at it right away. He was tired of being controlled by the constant ping of notifications, tired of jumping every time someone else demanded his attention. Instead, Jake looked around the platform and really saw it for the first time. There was an old man in a maintenance uniform sweeping the same spot over and over, like he was lost in thought. A teenage girl sat on a bench reading a thick book, completely absorbed in whatever story was happening on those pages. Near the far end of the platform, a street musician was setting up his guitar case, getting ready to play for the morning rush. And then Jake saw her. She was sitting on a wooden bench near the end of the platform, away from the main flow of foot traffic. She looked like she might be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing a dark blue coat that had seen many winters. What struck Jake wasn't her appearance, though. It was how still she was. In a world where everyone was constantly moving, checking phones, tapping feet, looking at watches, this woman sat perfectly still. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was watching the people go by with a calm expression that Jake hadn't seen on anyone's face in months. She wasn't homeless. Jake could tell that right away. Her clothes were clean and neat, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity. She wasn't waiting for a train either, because she wasn't looking at the schedule or checking the time. She was just sitting there, being present in a way that seemed almost magical in this underground world of rushing and stress. Jake found himself staring at her, trying to understand what made her so different from everyone else. She looked peaceful in a way that Jake had forgotten was possible. When was the last time he had felt truly calm? When was the last time he had sat somewhere without checking his phone, or thinking about work, or worrying about the next thing on his endless list of responsibilities? The woman must have felt Jake watching her because she turned her head and looked directly at him. Instead of the annoyed expression most people gave when they caught someone staring, she smiled. It wasn't a polite, fake smile like the ones Jake gave to clients or coworkers. It was a real smile, warm and genuine, like she was actually happy to see him. Jake felt his cheeks get hot with embarrassment. He had been caught staring like a child, and now this stranger was being kind to him when she had every right to tell him to mind his own business. He wanted to look away, to disappear into the crowd, but something about her expression held his attention. Her eyes were the kind of brown that reminded Jake of autumn leaves, and they had laugh lines around the edges that spoke of a life filled with joy and laughter. There was something in those eyes that made Jake feel like she could see right through all his stress and worry to something deeper underneath, something he had almost forgotten existed. The woman didn't say anything, but she kept looking at Jake with that same gentle smile. It wasn't uncomfortable or strange. Somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two people recognizing something important in each other without needing words to explain what it was. Jake's phone buzzed again, breaking the spell. He looked down automatically, saw another urgent message from work, and felt his shoulders tense up again. When he looked back toward the woman, she was still watching him, but now her expression had changed slightly. The smile was still there, but now it was mixed with something that looked like understanding. She had seen the change in Jake when his phone buzzed. She had watched his face go from curious and open to tight and worried in the space of a few seconds, and somehow, without saying a single word, she seemed to understand exactly what that meant. The woman reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. Jake couldn't see what it was from where he stood, but she held it in her closed hand like it was something precious. Then she did something that surprised Jake completely. She stood up slowly, using the back of the bench to steady herself, and began walking toward him. Not quickly, not with any sense of urgency, but with the same calm, peaceful energy she had been radiating from across the platform. Jake felt his heart start beating faster, but not from stress this time. There was something about this moment that felt important, like the beginning of something he couldn't quite name. As the woman got closer, Jake could see that whatever she was holding in her hand was small and worn, like something that had been carried for a long time. She stopped a few feet away from Jake, close enough that he could see the kindness in her weathered face, but far enough away that he didn't feel crowded or uncomfortable. For a moment, they just stood there looking at each other while the rest of the world rushed past around them. Then the woman did something that would change everything. She opened her hand and showed Jake what she had been carrying. In the palm of the woman's weathered hand was a small, smooth stone. It was the kind of rock you might find on a beach or by a river, worn down by time and water until all the rough edges were gone. The stone was a deep gray color with thin white lines running through it like tiny lightning bolts frozen in time. Jake stared at the stone, confused but somehow drawn to it. Why was this stranger showing him a rock? Was she trying to sell it to him? But looking at her face, Jake could tell this wasn't about money. There was something much deeper happening here, something he couldn't quite understand yet. The woman's eyes met Jake's, and she smiled that same warm smile from before. Without saying a word, she gently placed the stone back in her coat pocket and then did something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. She slowly extended her right hand toward him, palm facing up, fingers relaxed and open. It wasn't the kind of handshake Jake was used to in his business world, firm and quick and meant to show confidence. This was different. Her hand was offered like a gift, like an invitation to something Jake had never experienced before. Her palm was lined with years of living, marked by work and weather and time, but it looked soft and welcoming. Jake stood frozen, not knowing what to do. His brain tried to make sense of what was happening. Strangers didn't just walk up to you and offer their hand like this. People in the city kept to themselves. They avoided eye contact, minded their own business, stayed in their own little worlds. This woman was breaking every unspoken rule of city life. Around them, the subway platform continued its usual chaos. People rushed past, checking their phones, dragging their feet, lost in their own problems. The sound of an approaching train echoed through the tunnel. Announcements crackled over the old speakers, telling people to stand clear of the closing doors. But in the small space between Jake and the woman, everything felt perfectly still. Jake's phone buzzed again in his pocket. He could feel the vibration against his leg, probably another urgent message from his boss. The presentation he needed to finish seemed a million miles away from this moment. All the stress and worry that had been crushing him just minutes before suddenly felt less important than this simple gesture from a stranger. The woman's hand remained steady, neither pushing forward nor pulling back. She wasn't trying to force anything or rush Jake into a decision. Her expression showed no impatience, no frustration that he was taking so long to respond. She just waited, as calm and peaceful as she had been when Jake first noticed her sitting on the bench. Jake looked at her face more closely. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of his grandmother, who had passed away 5 years ago. His grandmother had the same kind of gentle strength, the same way of making people feel safe just by being near her. She had been the one person in Jake's family who never judged him, never made him feel like he wasn't doing enough or being enough. The memory of his grandmother made Jake's chest tighten, but not with stress this time. It was a different kind of tightness, like emotion trying to find its way to the surface. When was the last time he had thought about her? When was the last time he had allowed himself to remember what it felt like to be truly accepted by another person? Jake realized that his hands were shaking slightly, not from stress or anger, but from something deeper. The woman's simple gesture had touched something inside him that had been buried under months of deadlines and demands and disappointment. It was like she was offering him something he hadn't even realized he was missing. He thought about Lisa, waiting at home with ingredients for his favorite dinner. How long had it been since he had really looked at her face the way he was looking at this stranger's face now? How long since he had been fully present with the person he claimed to love most in the world? The guilt hit him like a wave, but it wasn't the usual crushing guilt he carried. This felt more like sadness for all the moments he had missed, all the connections he had let slip away. The woman seemed to sense the storm of emotions crossing Jake's face. Her expression softened even more, if that was possible. Her outstretched hand remained steady, but now it felt less like an invitation and more like an anchor, something solid to hold on to in the middle of his emotional chaos. Jake heard the approaching train getting closer. Soon it would arrive and this moment would be over. He would have to make a choice, take her hand or walk away, continue rushing through his life like everyone else on the platform, or stop for just a moment and see what this unexpected connection might offer. His logical mind tried to talk him out of it. This was weird. This wasn't normal behavior. He was already late for work. His boss was already angry. He couldn't afford to waste time with strange encounters in subway stations. He needed to focus on his career, on fixing his presentation, on saving his job. But another voice in his head, one he hadn't heard in a long time, whispered something different. When was the last time something unexpected had happened to him? When was the last time he had taken a chance on something that couldn't be measured in dollars or deadlines? When was the last time he had trusted a stranger? Or even trusted himself? Jake looked down at the woman's hand again. It was such a simple thing. Just one person offering connection to another. But in his world of constant competition and endless demands, simple human kindness felt revolutionary. It felt like the most radical thing anyone had ever offered him. The train was almost at the platform now. Jake could feel the rumble under his feet, could see the light growing brighter in the tunnel. In a few seconds, the doors would open and people would rush on and off, and the moment would be lost forever. Jake's own hand started to move almost without his permission. Slowly, hesitantly, like a plant reaching towards sunlight after a long winter, his right hand began to lift from his side. The woman watched this movement with patient eyes, never pushing, never demanding, just waiting for Jake to make his own choice. As his hand rose higher, Jake felt something shifting inside his chest. It was like a door that had been locked for months was finally starting to creak open. He couldn't remember the last time he had made a decision based on feeling instead of logic, based on connection instead of calculation. The train pulled into the station with a loud screech of metal on metal. The doors hadn't opened yet, but Jake knew he only had seconds before the platform would be flooded with rushing passengers. Seconds before this strange, beautiful moment would be swept away by the tide of normal life. Jake's hand was halfway to the woman's now, trembling slightly but moving with growing certainty. He could see the hope in her eyes, but also the complete acceptance that whatever he chose would be okay with her. She wasn't trying to save him or fix him or change him. She was simply offering to share a moment of human connection with him. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Jake realized that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to accept what someone else was offering him. Jake's hand finally touched hers, and the world seemed to stop moving. Her skin was warm and soft, nothing like the cold, firm handshakes he was used to in his office. There was something about the way her fingers gently closed around his that made Jake feel like he was being welcomed home after a very long journey. The simple touch sent a wave of calm through his body that he hadn't felt in years. The train doors opened with a loud hiss, and people began pouring out onto the platform. Bodies brushed past Jake and the woman, everyone in their usual hurry to get somewhere else. But Jake barely noticed the crowd. For the first time in months, maybe years, he wasn't thinking about where he needed to be next. He was completely present in this one moment. The woman's grip wasn't tight or demanding. It was gentle but steady, like an anchor keeping him grounded while the chaos of the city swirled around them. Jake realized his breathing had changed too. The short, shallow breaths that had become normal for him were deeper now, calmer. The constant tightness in his chest was starting to loosen. Without saying a word, the woman guided Jake toward the bench where she had been sitting. Not pulling or pushing, just a gentle suggestion with her hand. Jake followed, feeling like he was walking through a dream. They sat down together, still holding hands, while the morning rush continued around them like a river flowing past an island of peace. Jake stared down at their joined hands, amazed by how natural it felt. When was the last time he had held someone's hand without checking his phone at the same time? When was the last time he had sat somewhere without thinking about all the things he should be doing instead? The woman seemed to understand that Jake needed this moment of stillness, this break from the endless race he had been running. People continued getting on and off the train. Jake heard the doors close and the train pull away from the station, carrying with it all the passengers who were still trapped in their morning routines. He should have been on that train. He should have been racing toward his office, panicking about the presentation, checking his phone for more urgent messages. But sitting here with this stranger's hand in his, none of that felt important anymore. The platform grew quieter as the crowd thinned out. The next train wouldn't arrive for several minutes, giving Jake and the woman a pocket of peace in the usually chaotic station. Jake could hear things he normally missed. The distant sound of music from the street musician's guitar, the quiet conversation between two maintenance workers, even the rhythm of his own heartbeat. The woman still hadn't spoken a single word, but somehow Jake felt like they were having the most important conversation of his life. Her presence was saying things that words couldn't express, that he wasn't alone, that someone saw his struggle, that it was okay to stop running for just a moment, and remember what it felt like to be human. Jake thought about all the people in his life who cared about him. Lisa, who had been waiting patiently for him to remember that love was more important than work. His parents, who called every Sunday but rarely got more than 5 minutes of his distracted attention. His old college friends who had stopped inviting him to things because he always canceled at the last minute. When had he become so isolated? When had he forgotten how to accept kindness from others? The woman's thumb moved slightly against Jake's hand, a tiny gesture that somehow conveyed more comfort than all the motivational speeches and self-help books he had tried to use to fix his life. She wasn't trying to give him advice or tell him what to do. She was simply being present with him, sharing this moment of connection without asking for anything in return. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket again, but for the first time in months he didn't immediately reach for it. The sound that usually sent his stress levels through the roof now seemed distant and unimportant. Whatever crisis was happening at work would still be there in 10 minutes. But this moment, this unexpected gift of human connection, might never come again. He looked up at the woman's face and saw something that took his breath away. She was crying, but not from sadness. These were tears of joy, of recognition, of two souls connecting across the divide that usually separates strangers. Her smile was brighter than ever, and her eyes sparkled with unshed tears that spoke of a lifetime of wisdom and compassion. Jake felt his own eyes starting to water, and he didn't try to stop it. When was the last time he had cried? Not from frustration or stress, but from pure emotion? The tears came slowly at first, then faster, as months of buried feelings finally found their way to the surface. The woman squeezed his hand gently, letting him know it was safe to feel whatever he was feeling. They sat together in comfortable silence as Jake cried quietly, releasing years of pressure and pain and loneliness he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The woman didn't try to fix him or offer empty words of comfort. She just held his hand and let him be human, let him feel, let him heal in the safety of her presence. Another train approached the platform, its headlight cutting through the dim tunnel like a beacon. Jake knew he should probably get on this one, should start making his way toward his office and the pile of work waiting for him. But he wasn't ready to let go of this moment yet. For the first time in years, something felt more important than his career. The woman seemed to sense his internal struggle. She reached into her coat pocket with her free hand and pulled out the small stone she had shown him earlier. Up close, Jake could see it was even more beautiful than he had first thought. The white lines running through the gray rock looked like rivers or roads, like paths leading somewhere peaceful. She placed the stone in Jake's free palm, closing his fingers around it gently. The rock was smooth and warm from being carried close to her body, and it fit perfectly in his hand like it had been made just for him. Jake looked up at her face questioningly, but she just smiled and nodded, as if to say the stone was his now. The train pulled into the station, and the woman slowly stood up, still holding Jake's hand. He stood with her, not wanting to break the connection but knowing that this magical moment was coming to an end. The platform began filling with new passengers, and the real world started creeping back into their peaceful bubble. The woman looked into Jake's eyes one more time, and Jake saw something there that would stay with him forever. It was love, not romantic love, but the pure, unconditional love that one human being can offer another. Love without conditions, without expectations, without demands. Just love for the sake of love itself. She squeezed his hand one final time, then slowly let go. But before Jake could say anything or ask her name or try to understand what had just happened, she did something that surprised him one last time. She reached up and gently touched his cheek, wiping away a tear he didn't even realize was still there. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the train that was preparing to leave the station. Jake stood frozen on the platform, watching the woman walk toward the train. Every step she took felt like she was taking a piece of his heart with her. He wanted to call out, to ask her name, to understand what had just happened between them. But somehow he knew that words would only cheapen the perfect moment they had shared. The train doors were already starting to close when the woman turned back one last time. She smiled at Jake and placed her hand over her heart, then pointed gently at him. The message was clear. She would carry this moment with her just as he would carry it with him. Then the doors sealed shut, and Jake watched her face disappear behind the dark windows as the train pulled away into the tunnel. The platform fell quiet again, leaving Jake alone with the small stone in his palm and a heart that felt completely different than it had 30 minutes ago. He looked down at the rock, turning it over in his fingers. It was such a simple thing, just a piece of stone worn smooth by time and weather. But it felt like the most precious gift he had ever received. Jake's phone buzzed again, bringing him back to reality with a jolt. This time he pulled it out and looked at the screen. 7 missed calls from his boss. 12 urgent emails. 3 text messages asking where he was. The presentation that had seemed like the end of the world an hour. Ego was still waiting for him at the office. But something had changed. Inside Jake. The panic that usually gripped him when problems piled up wasn't there anymore. Instead, he felt a strange sense of calm, like he was looking at his problems from a great distance. They were still real, still needed to be dealt with, but they didn't own him anymore. Jake scrolled through the messages from his boss, reading about the client meeting and the rushed timeline and all the reasons why everything was urgent and critical. But as he read, Jake found himself thinking about the woman's peaceful face, about the way she had sat so calmly in the middle of all the city's chaos. What would she think about all this workplace drama? Would she understand why Jake had been willing to sacrifice his health, his relationships, his happiness for a job that would replace him in a week if something happened to him? The next train arrived and Jake got on. But instead of immediately diving into work emails or planning his day, he sat quietly and held the stone in his pocket. The smooth surface felt warm under his fingers, and somehow it helped him stay connected to the peace he had felt with the woman. As the train moved through the dark tunnels, Jake thought about Lisa waiting at home. She had bought ingredients for his favorite dinner, had probably spent time planning a special evening for them to reconnect. How many times had he rushed through those moments, his mind still at the office even when his body was at home? How many times had he looked at his phone instead of looking into her eyes? For the first time in months, Jake felt genuine excitement about seeing Lisa, not the nervous, guilty feeling he usually had when he knew he was disappointing her, but real joy at the thought of spending time with the person he loved. He wanted to tell her about the woman on the platform, about the strange and wonderful thing that had happened to him. He wanted to hold Lisa's hand the way the woman had held his, with complete presence and attention. When Jake finally arrived at his office building, he stood outside for a moment before going in. The building stretched high above him, full of people working frantically to meet deadlines and impress bosses and climb ladders that led to more stress and less happiness. Jake had been one of those people for 3 years, racing up those stairs every morning like his life depended on it. He walked into the lobby and pressed the elevator button, but something felt different. The familiar anxiety about facing his boss wasn't there anymore. The constant worry about whether he was doing enough, being enough, achieving enough had been replaced by a quiet confidence Jake hadn't felt since he was a child. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave Jake time to think about what he wanted to say to his boss. Not excuses or apologies, but the truth, that he had been working himself into the ground, that the constant pressure was affecting his health and his relationships, that something needed to change. When Jake walked into the office, his boss was waiting at his desk with an expression that could have melted steel. 3 years ago, that look would have sent Jake into a panic attack. Today it just made him sad. Sad that this man had chosen to live his life in a constant state of anger and stress. Sad that he was trying to pull everyone around him into that same dark place. "Where have you been?" his boss demanded. "The client is expecting the presentation in 2 hours and you haven't even started the revisions." Jake looked at his boss calmly, his hand still touching the stone in his pocket. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'll do my best to get it done. But I want to talk to you about something important after the presentation is over." His boss blinked, clearly surprised by Jake's calm response. He had been expecting excuses, panic, frantic apologies. Instead, Jake sat down at his computer and began working on the presentation with a focus and clarity he hadn't felt in years. The work went faster than Jake expected. Without the constant anxiety clouding his mind, he could think more clearly, make better decisions, create better solutions. The presentation came together beautifully, and Jake realized that his best work had always happened when he was calm and centered, not when he was stressed and panicked. 2 hours later, Jake walked into the client meeting feeling more confident than he had in months. The presentation went perfectly. The client loved the new direction, approved the budget, and even complimented Jake on his innovative ideas. His boss was speechless, clearly amazed at how well everything had gone. After the meeting, Jake asked to speak with his boss privately. They sat in the conference room and Jake took a deep breath before speaking. "I love my job," Jake began, "but I can't continue working the way I have been. The constant overtime, the impossible deadlines, the expectation that work comes before everything else in my life. It's not sustainable. I'm burning out, and it's affecting the quality of my work and my relationships." His boss started to interrupt, but Jake held up his hand gently. "I'm not quitting. I'm asking for balance. Reasonable deadlines, normal working hours, time to do my job well without sacrificing my health or my personal life. I think you'll find that I actually do better work when I'm not running on stress and caffeine." To Jake's surprise, his boss didn't argue. He looked tired, older than Jake had noticed before. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been working like this for 20 years. I barely know my own kids. My wife and I hardly talk anymore. Maybe you're right. Maybe there's a better way to do this." They talked for another 30 minutes, setting new boundaries, discussing realistic timelines, and planning a more sustainable approach to Jake's workload. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. That evening, Jake left the office at 5 o'clock for the first time in months. On the train ride home, he called Lisa. When she answered, he could hear the surprise in her voice. He never called her during his commute, usually spending that time answering work emails. "I'm on my way home," Jake said, smiling as he held the smooth stone in his free hand. "And I can't wait to see you. I can't wait to have dinner together and actually be present, really present with you. I have so much to tell you about my day." Jake could hear Lisa crying softly on the other end of the phone, but he knew these were happy tears. "I love you," she whispered. "I've missed you so much." "I love you too," Jake said, and for the first time in years he meant it with his whole heart. "And I promise I'm going to start showing you that every single day." When Jake got home, Lisa was waiting at the door with that same beautiful smile he had fallen in love with years ago. He dropped his bag, took her hands in his just like the woman had taken his hands that morning, and looked into her eyes with complete attention. They stood there for a long moment, reconnecting without words, sharing the kind of presence Jake had learned was the most precious gift one person could give another. That night, over dinner, Jake told Lisa about the woman on the platform, about how a stranger's simple act of kindness had changed everything, about how sometimes the most important moments in life come from the most unexpected places, and about how grateful he was to have been reminded that love, connection, and presence were worth more than any promotion or paycheck. 6 months later, Jake still carried the stone in his pocket every day. He never saw the woman again, but he thought about her often. Whenever he felt himself slipping back into old patterns of stress and hurry, he would touch the smooth rock and remember that moment of perfect peace on the subway platform. Jake and Lisa were engaged now, planning a wedding that would celebrate love instead of impressing people. Jake's work was going better than ever because he was calmer, more focused, more creative. He had started volunteering at a community center on weekends, helping other people who were struggling with work-life balance. But most importantly, Jake had learned to see the world differently. He noticed the small acts of kindness happening around him every day, a person holding a door, a smile from a stranger, a moment of genuine connection between two human beings. He had learned that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come not from grand gestures or big decisions, but from the simple,